just didn't think that he could feel good on his own.
I got up the next morning and went into her room, and she was already gone.
You never want to lose a child. You can't imagine what that's like.
We don't have any detox facilities available. We don't have any treatment facilities.
The cartels are running a business, and their job is to get that drugs into their community.
Cartels try to exploit those kids that are coming across.
And it's the greatest national security threat to the United States right today.
I have a person who's really struggling. What can I do? How can I help?
My wife, supports me through and through with everything.
Focus on you and your recovery, and I feel like you can really go a long way.
Drug overdoses kill tens of thousands of people in the U.S. every year. Many of those overdoses involve opioids, like prescription painkillers or heroin. And many of those overdoses happen here in central Illinois, in cities and towns, to people young and old. Tonight we take an in-depth look at what's behind those deaths, at the sources of those drugs, and at what's being done to save lives here in Illinois. We'll hear from law enforcement, lawmakers, doctors, and families affected by overdose.
Shaylin Connor loved to sing. And her mom, Stacy, says she loved life.
She was one of the happiest kids I've ever known. Her nickname growing up was always Smiley. High school, was involved in everything, was a cheerleader. She was homecoming queen.
Shaylin got accepted into college, but after her senior year of high school, she found a new group of friends.
Started dabbling in marijuana, and she liked that. Started drinking a little, and eventually they were popping pills. We did everything we knew to do. We had her in treatments. We brought her home. She went to meetings.
Eventually, Shaylin went to treatment for 6 months.
She came home in June. We really thought she had it beat this time. She got a job, was working out with me, living at home, doing great. Had no idea she relapsed. She came home on a Friday night, hugged me, said, "Love you, Mama," going to bed. And I got up the next morning and went into her room, and she was already gone.
Shaylin died last October. She was 22. Her story is painful, but it's also painfully common. The state health director says last year, nearly 2,000 people in Illinois died of opioid overdose.
It's really across the board, from north to south, east to west, every community. No one has unfortunately been really spared or left untouched by the opioid crisis.
Opioids are a class of drugs that includes prescription painkillers like oxycodone and hydrocodone, and the street drug heroin. In high doses, they shut off the part of the brain that makes you breathe. State health officials say if nothing changes, 2,700 people a year could die by 2020, just in Illinois.
The drug supply in Illinois is one that's getting more and more and more poisonous every year. That's largely related to the introduction of these synthetic drugs.
Those synthetics are drugs like fentanyl, made in labs and much stronger than other opioids. Christian County Sheriff Bruce Kettlecamp says synthetics are turning up more and more.
We've seen the heroin cut with fentanyl here in Christian County. We've got lab results back where the fentanyl was in with the heroin.
The news may be dire, but those affected by the opioid crisis are stepping up to help. Shaylin's mom, Stacy, has helped teach others about a drug that can stop overdoses.
It's deep in our heart. I mean, we want to go out. We truly want to help people. We're doing it because we care. We don't want anybody to go through what we've been through. Addiction doesn't discriminate. Shaylin was your all-American teenage girl. She had dreams. She had hopes. When she came home this last time, she wanted to get a job and get out on her own and get married and have kids like everybody else. But for whatever unfortunate reason, that drug just doesn't let you do that.
Jennifer Bertoni is a mom too.
I have 3 grown children and 1 14-month-old granddaughter. She is my world.
She has a lifetime of memories.
Like the picture of me and my sister.
But almost 20 years ago, those memories took a painful turn.
When I was about 28 years old, I had a tooth that was hurting and had a dentist prescribe me Vicodin. Something just switched in my brain, and it got so bad that for 20 years, that drug was the only thing that was important to me, and all I had to do was go ask for it.
She asked her doctors, she asked ER workers, and when their supplies stopped, she bought off the streets, taking up to 40 pills a day.
You feel so good. That's how it starts off. And then after a while, you're turning and you're starting to take it to not be sick. You don't shower, you don't eat, you don't care. You just want that drug.
Jennifer worked as an EMT, work that kept her from trying heroin. Still, by last January, Jennifer's life was slipping away. Health officials say thousands of people like Jennifer are addicted to opioid drugs.
For individuals who are grappling with end-stage cancer or severe pain, opioids are quite literally a godsend. However, if misused or prescribed inappropriately, individuals can become dependent upon them, and that dependency is what we now call, or what we think of as, opioid use disorder.
Opioid use disorder is a condition that's exploding, increasing exponentially in the United States.
Jerry Cruz leads the SIU School of Medicine. We asked him why the condition is exploding.
It starts with prescription pain medications like oxycodone. They are available. They are relatively expensive. They're produced in large quantities and they're distributed in large quantities.
He says some doctors prescribe those meds more than they should, that emergency departments often rely on those drugs, and that families sometimes share leftover painkillers. Plus, addicts may use those drugs to handle trauma and stress. Once addicted, users can move from prescription painkillers to cheaper street drugs like heroin and risky synthetic drugs like fentanyl.
I wanted my kids, I wanted my grandbaby, I wanted my parents in my life.
Last year, Jennifer's addiction drove her to a decision. She sought treatment, and in the months since, she's leaned on support from others.
I have been in the moment with everything, with my kids, my family, and that feels so good.
Like Stacy Welch, she also wants to use her experience to help others.
I know I'm only one person, but I've got, other recovering addicts that are willing to come together and help. But we've got to get going. I mean, we've got to get started somehow. And I think that's going to make such a big difference.
Up next,
My whole life leading up to that moment was a blur.
what it takes to break free of addiction and the efforts underway to save lives in Illinois. And later,
The cartels are running a business, and their job is to get that drugs into your communities.
we head to the border where police and ranchers are fighting the flow of deadly drugs into the country.
If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction and needs help, the Illinois Department of Public Health has a helpline. That helpline has trained specialists who can connect callers with treatments and recovery support services. That number is 1-833-2-FIND-HELP. For a complete list of resources, go to our website, wandtv.com.
Unfortunately, with the heroin, it's killing people in our county.
Federal officials call the opioid crisis an epidemic. But how can we stop it? And how can individual users get help? We set out to find out.
Can we go on that?
Sure. From the outside, Corbin Tannhauser looked like the perfect dad.
See any fish?
But for years, Corbin had a secret. one that often kept him from his daughter Sydney.
You know, there was times where I would black out and I would be sleeping and she would be at home. And everybody called me a great dad, a phenomenal dad, but I was still hooked to the medication.
Starting in 2011, Corbin underwent 9 shoulder surgeries. Along the way, he developed an addiction to painkillers. Last year, he'd had enough and checked into Sunspire Health Heartland, a treatment center near Gilman. Corbin remembers when his wife and daughter came to see him.
The day that they came for that first visit, that was the first time I truly met my daughter, because my whole life leading up to that moment was a blur.
Care at Sunspire starts with medical detox to get users off drugs comfortably. That's followed by days of individual counseling and group discussions, often about trauma that contributes to addiction, along with lectures about staying sober after rehab.
So it's making a difference and getting a good relapse prevention plan while they're here, so they know what they're going to do when they run into the triggers in the community.
Public health officials say many people who abuse drugs can benefit from outpatient treatment alone. We asked Sunspire's executive director when people need inpatient care.
So I think the question is, how severe is their addiction and how is their substance use disorder impacting their life? Are they still able to work? What is their home or family life like? Has their family given up hope on them? Have they had previous treatment at an outpatient level of care and not been successful? Have they relapsed? Those are all kind of indicators of the level of care that someone might need.
But even after treatment, many users relapse, often several times.
We don't know whether it's the first treatment, the third treatment, or the 10th treatment. We just don't know when someone is going to realize, I have to make some changes based on what I've learned over the course of all the therapy that I've done and all the treatment that I've done.
Remember when we walked all the way around?
Corbin says he's been sober a year, even though staying that way took sacrifice.
Some people didn't agree with the changes that I made. Some people weren't for it, or they kept telling me, oh, you changed, you're not the same person. My wife, supports me through and through with everything, my daughter as well.
Kent Usher knows all about fatherhood too. He remembers the old days with his son, Kyle.
Kyle was the one of the 3 that always had a lot of friends. He was a social kid, but he was also a different kind of kid. He always said he was an alien because he didn't fit in this world. 6, 7 years old when he told us that. Taught himself how to play piano, taught himself how to play guitar. He was in a band, Neoga Blacksmith is the band.
Kyle went to college and found work, but he'd also started drinking heavily and using drugs. The signs began adding up.
Checked his arms, and sure enough, he had needle marks in it. Well, he was taking morphine. So, since he was living here, and he was stealing from us and everything else, I said, that's it. You're going to rehab or you're out, And it's tough when it's your kid to tell them you got to get out of the house.
After rehab, Kyle did better, but soon started showing signs of use. One day, his dad went to mow the grass at Kyle's rental house.
Truck pulled up from his work, and he always went to work no matter what. The guy said, have you seen Kyle or heard from Kyle? I said, no. And right then, I knew he was in the house. So I busted out the back window of the door and ran into his bedroom. He was dead. He'd probably been dead. It was several hours because rigor mortis had set in. And needles by his bed.
Last fall, the Illinois Department of Public Health released a state action plan to stop deaths like Kyle's. Right now, the state projects the number of overdose deaths to reach 2,700 by 2020, but the plan aims to cut those projected deaths by a third, which would still leave around 1,800 deaths a year.
So we wanted to make sure that that we set a goal that was ambitious, but still one that's attainable. So we do think that the goal of reducing deaths by a third is one that's attainable. To be sure, it's one that's ambitious.
One part of the plan? Safer prescribing of prescription opioids. Research shows the longer a patient is prescribed opioid drugs, the more likely they are to become addicted. Health Director Nirav D. Shah says the state is considering technology to track how many painkillers doctors prescribe.
There are other notifications that we're looking at deploying that just say, hey Dr. Smith, we've taken a look at your last 3 weeks or the last 3 months of prescribing, and we just want you to know that it's a little bit higher than your peers.
The state is also considering new prescribing guidelines. And state officials are working with medical schools like SIU in Springfield to train the next generation of doctors.
And we've been very extensively training our residents in this process. We have had numerous lectures about what pain management is, how to manage pain, what the evidence says to support what medications are best to manage pain.
Still, other states have taken more aggressive steps. New York and New Jersey have capped the length of painkiller prescriptions. The Illinois State Senate passed a similar proposal, but it stalled in the House. We asked Senator Andy Minar about that proposal at a press conference last month.
I supported that legislation because having seen what I see in my own county where I've lived my whole life, I think we've reached a point to where perhaps extraordinary measures need to be taken.
Local law enforcement are adapting their policies too. In the Christian County communities of Kincaid and Edinburgh, police chiefs have offered help for addicts.
We don't ask any questions about your past. We don't ask you where you get your meth from or your heroin. Okay, all we want to do is help that person.
I don't think that anyone should be allowed to die. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're here to protect you. And if it's we save you at 10 o'clock in the morning and at 10 o'clock at night you overdose again, we're going to be right there.
But Sheriff Bruce Kettlecamp says getting those addicts into treatment isn't easy.
We don't have many resources here as far as treatment facilities. We don't have any detox facilities available. We don't have any treatment facilities.
Right now in Illinois, we estimate that roughly 200,000 or so, maybe 250,000 individuals who need some form of care are still waiting to find it.
The state action plan calls for more access to inpatient beds, and health officials say that's not the only option. Clinics like Crossings Healthcare in Decatur offer medication-assisted treatment. That uses medicines like Suboxone and Vivitrol along with counseling.
The medication doesn't help the underlying issue as far as the addiction. It just helps the symptoms of the addiction. And so the individual then needs to learn skills to deal with why they became an addict to begin with.
Every day we get another phone call and we get new people walking in seeking treatment. And so until that's not happening anymore, we know that we still have a need to meet.
And there are more parts to the plan, involving education, first responders, and life-saving drugs.
You never want to lose a child. You can't imagine what that's like. It literally rips your heart out.
But whatever state leaders are doing, Kent says parents and others must learn to spot signs of addiction themselves and act.
I don't care how many billions of dollars they put into opioids and everything else. If you aren't educated on a local level, and that's the police, probation, mental health, health services, then you've got a problem, and we've got a problem.
Up next,
it takes that pain away. It makes you, stop thinking about, all the craziness or all the bad things.
What led one woman to heroin, and what others are doing to save her life. And still to come,
I hope that it can touch somebody.
How a father who lost his son to overdose is turning grief into song.
I started doing heroin a little bit more, and then that little bit more took basically my life from everybody.
We've already heard from families affected by overdose, and we've heard from recovering addicts. Now it's time to hear from someone who is still using heroin and from those working to keep her safe.
At the Phoenix Center in Springfield, preventing the spread of HIV and hepatitis is a top priority. To do that, the center launched a needle exchange program in 2011, offering clean needles, supplies, and now the overdose drug naloxone.
We do know that we have people coming from over 60 counties. Because we're one of only 2 programs in this part of the state, people drive significant distances to get the services and to get the naloxone.
During our visit, we spoke with one of those clients, a woman named Ann. She first started using other drugs with her then husband and friends.
We used to always get high together, and it's actually, we tried anything and everything, and the biggest thing about that is we never got stuck on just like one thing.
As time passed, Ann lost 2 friends to overdose and looked for a way to handle the pain.
And next thing I know, I started doing heroin a little bit more, and then that little bit more took basically my life from everybody. I guess the reason why the heroin stuck more than anything is because it's just like with drinking, you know what I mean? It takes that pain away. It makes you, stop thinking about, all the craziness or all the bad things. I thought you would be able to cold turkey it, and I might have for like a couple weeks or a couple days, and then, I'll just do it one more time.
Ann says she tried medical detox. She also remembers a short stay in jail.
They had said to me, don't go back and use, you've been 6 days clean. Think about how much pain you just went through and how sick you were. And I was like, I know. And of course, the first thing I do, what do? I go get high as soon as I get out, because I'm so sick and I barely can walk, and I just was like, I need that fix.
While her heroin use continues, Ann says the supplies she gets here are life-saving.
The alcohol pads, the Band-Aids, and the Narcan, which is like the best lifesaver in the world. Oh my goodness, I couldn't tell you how many times I've had to use it, and it's beyond amazing.
Executive Director Jonna Cooley says the center also helps users who want to quit, but she says that isn't easy.
A lot of people who are using opioids would like to stop using, and so sometimes they'll ask for referrals for treatment, but they're just so hard. It's just so hard right now to get people in because there's not a lot of drug treatment facilities.
The U.S. Surgeon General says more of us should carry naloxone or Narcan. That's the drug that stops overdoses. But just what is it and how does it work?
It's known as an opioid antagonist, as it goes into the brain and removes the opium out of the brain, and your brain will start functioning normally as far as telling you to breathe.
Mike Burkham is the vice president of the Tyler Yunt Foundation. The group is named for Burkham's late son. They've given Narcan kits to local law enforcement and trained others how to use it. We asked him to show us how to use the drug.
First thing we try to do is we wake them up. Hey, can you wake up? If they're still unresponsive and we think that we have an overdose, we can administer Narcan. This is a nasal Narcan that we distribute and train people to use. It's very easy to use. It comes with instructions, but also we show them how to do it in the training. You simply peel it out of the package. This just goes in one nostril, just like this, and then you push the button and administer the Narcan. After the Narcan has been administered, you put the patient into the recovery position, which you would put their arm up, their leg up, and you would roll them over on their side to keep their airway open. Make sure that 911 gets called and that they're on the way, and then you can turn over care to the firemen and paramedics.
Burkham says Narcan cannot hurt a patient. He says there's another important step: calling for help.
If you wake them up and you don't get them help, if they've got more heroin or whatever form of opiate they're using, they can use that to try to counteract that withdrawal that the Narcan has them in. And what it does is it causes them to have way too much opiate in the blood, and then when the Narcan wears off in 45 minutes, they will probably go into an overdose that we can't reverse. and they will die.
Up next,
we still love you, and we understand better what predicament you're in.
how families affected by overdose are fighting back. And still to come,
almost 90% of all the illegal drugs in this country that are in your communities and our communities are coming through where we're standing.
we go to the Mexican border to see what's being done to fight the flow of deadly drugs.
If you or someone you know is at risk for an opioid overdose, there are resources available to teach you how to administer Narcan. The Tyler Yount Foundation will offer free training. You can contact Mark at 217-519-0879, or you can call the Illinois Department of Public Health, which also has free training. That number is 217-557-7975. For more on these resources and others, head to WANDTV.com.
Tonight we've heard from families affected by overdose, but many of those families are turning their grief into action.
Connie and John Geyer farm near Monticello. Part of their work? Raising goats. But lately, Connie and John have taken on another kind of work inspired by their daughter, Marissa.
She was an amazing young lady. She was one of the best swimmers I know, and she was into all kinds of sports and clubs at school.
Over the years, though, Marissa began smoking, then drinking, and eventually using pills and heroin. One night, at 20 years old, Marissa overdosed while out with someone else.
So by herself, overnight, she slowly died.
This day, Connie shared her story with students at Arthur Lovington Atwood Hammond High School. In particular, she wanted students to know about state laws that protect people who seek medical help for overdoses.
I'm here especially to talk to you kids about this Good Samaritan overdose law. The law protects you and the person who is overdosing, even if you are participating.
Connie's spoken at several schools. She says the most powerful conversations often happen when her presentations end.
We just say, you know, look, if you're not comfortable talking to your pastor or your parents or your teacher, our phone number's on that sheet that we gave you, that information that we gave you, and you can call us and we'll help you get help.
Connie says it's important families and community groups have those same conversations about addiction and how to find help. She says these conversations remind her of another conversation with Marissa after school.
Well, she said, Mom, I finally realized my purpose. Who would have thought that it could be this big, that so many people are struggling? And her purpose was to maybe help all these people.
Lyman Ellerman's been writing songs since he was a kid.
When we had bands around here when I was young, you know, we would play songs that I had written. I probably wouldn't play any of them today.
These days, he's touring with a new tune.
Call me an addict. I've been doing this for years, just old. The guy that I wrote it with described it as not the feel-good song of summer. It's about addiction. I say,
It's a song he wrote after a conversation with his son Riley, who was back home after college and addicted to opioids.
But he told me one day that he didn't really understand why I couldn't just accept him the way that he was, that you know, he needed that to feel good, because he just didn't think that he could feel good on his own. And you know, he was trying to reassure me that it was completely, he was in control, you know. And I responded to him that, you know, son, I was real proud of him for even being at a place where he could say, Dad, you know, this is what I want to say.
Last October, Riley died of an overdose.
You see the shell,
but Lyman carried on.
But you can't see the man I'm like.
And produced a music video with a local filmmaker.
In your eyes I am lost. I'm still here, but I'm somewhere else. I hope that it can touch somebody and help somebody that's in that realize that, you know, we still love you, and we understand better what predicament you're in and the pain that you're going through.
I don't know if I'm still fighting or hiding or dying anymore.
Up next,
and in my opinion, it's the greatest national security threat to the United States right today.
we head to the border to find out where those deadly drugs are coming from and how others are fighting back. And after our special, head to our WAND News Center 17 Facebook page. There we'll have an online discussion about the opioid crisis with a panel of experts.
I would have never thought that we would have a problem. We would have drugs in Christian County from the Mexican cartel, but we do.
Law enforcement in Illinois told us if we wanted to understand the opioid crisis here, we had to find the source of many illegal drugs at the Mexican border. Turns out, Macon County Sheriff Howard Buffett owns land at the border and has been studying smuggling there for years. He offered to show us where those drugs are coming from and introduce us to those fighting a battle at the border.
The land along the U.S. border in Arizona is rough and rocky. Heat burns, plants prick, and animals bite. Still, generations of ranchers have earned their living off this land.
A cow rancher, have mother cows raise calves to sell for beef.
For 20 years, ranchers like Ed Ashurst have faced another challenge.
My home has been burglarized multiple times. They've stolen vehicles from me, firearms, money, cash, jewelry, etc., etc., etc. I've seen it all.
They are outlaws, members of cartels that smuggle drugs and people across the border. In Mexico, they bring fear and violence. In the U.S., they move drugs with smugglers called mules.
Those mules have scouts. They have an intelligence network that's better than anything the CIA or the Army's got.
Mark Daniels is sheriff of Cochise County, a county with 83 miles of international border.
So we're on the front line of this, and we do our darndest. The border is a federal problem. The ones who take two steps north are their community problem.
Sheriff Daniels showed us this house in Naco, Arizona. Inside the garage, authorities found a hydraulic lift to a tunnel that ran under the border with Mexico. Sheriff Daniels says the Obama administration increased border security at points of entry like this one, part of a federal focus on high-traffic spots along the border. Authorities say hard drugs like heroin often come through ports like these, sometimes even on the backs of children attending school in the U.S.
The cartels try to exploit those kids that are coming across by having them body carry meth and heroin. So that's one of our biggest educational things right now, that we're partnering with the not only the folks that work at the port of entry, but with Border Patrol, to get into the schools and educate these kids on how best to avoid being used by the cartels.
But Sheriff Daniels took us away from those points of entry to a spot where high defenses end.
Now that we're further enough away from the port of entry, we have very little protection down here. And this is where the cartels bring their products, and they bring this human smuggling too. There you go.
Back at his office, the sheriff showed us some of what his deputies have uncovered.
We see marijuana, we see heroin, we see fentanyl, we see cocaine, we see meth. And almost 90% of all the illegal drugs in this country that are in your communities and our communities are coming through where we're standing.
To move those products, cartels rely on a sophisticated system of mules and spotters. They also rely on cover from the landscape here. To get a better view, we met with philanthropist and Macon County Sheriff Howard Buffett. Buffett owns land on the border and has studied smuggling for years. He's even captured surveillance videos like these that appear to show smugglers moving across the land. First, Buffett took us by helicopter to a remote stretch of land called the San Rafael Valley.
It has literally hundreds of washouts, ravines. They run all the way across the border into Mexico. So you can start in those and transverse across the border into the United States. And it's almost impossible to see people unless, you know, you've got some kind of aerial coverage.
We also toured land accessible only by foot or a special vehicle. In spots like these, Buffett and others say a border wall would be tough to build and easy to cross.
Border Patrol needs a lot of support. What they need is the money to build an appropriate fencing and appropriate structures in the appropriate places.
Above all, they say, the battle at the border requires national attention and commitment.
You can build a wall 300 foot high and 100 yards wide. And if you don't have boots on the ground at the wall isn't going to work. If you have boots on the ground at the wall, you don't need the wall. It's that simple.
It's coming through the southern border, it's coming to your neighborhood. We got to work together on that. As sheriffs, we're doing that in this country. Sheriff Buffett, myself, sheriffs are all from the national side, and police chiefs, we got to stand united on this, and we just can't turn our heads and say, it's not our problem, it's everybody's problem. It's everybody's problem.
The Border Patrol did not answer our requests for an interview. Since our trip to Arizona, Howard Buffett has published a book outlining his research and his views on border security.
Up next, we take another look at the lives lost to opioid abuse.
If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction and needs help, the Illinois Department of Public Health has a helpline. That helpline has trained specialists who can connect callers with treatments and recovery support services. That number is 1-833-2-FIND-HELP. For a complete list of resources, go to our website, wandtv.com.
Tonight, we wanted to end where we began, by focusing on those lost to overdose. We wanted to focus on how they lived, rather than how they died.
She was an amazing young lady. She was one of the best swimmers I know, and she was into all kinds of sports and clubs at school. I mean, she was so independent and smart, so smart. She was the most incredible cook, very talented. She had a beautiful voice, and she would give you the shirt off her back.
He was trying to get me to understand some of the things that he was going through, and I was trying hard to. I was real proud of him for even being at a place where he could say, "Dad, you know, this is what I want to say to you, you know."
He always said he was an alien because he didn't fit in this world, and his name was Chronotonius. He was like 6, 7 years old when he told us that. And he was from the planet Zadar. And he almost had us convinced because he was just that type of kid. He was, you know, a little different. But always had a lot of friends. He was a social kid. Taught himself how to play piano. Taught himself how to play guitar. Played the harmonica. Very, very good at all that.
Her nickname growing up was always Smiley. She was well liked, had a great childhood. High school, was involved in everything, was a cheerleader. She was homecoming queen. Just all around, she was your typical all around American girl. Music, sang a lot, played the piano, played the clarinet and band. Very talented, very talented.
if you've lost someone to overdose. We'd like to hear your story and your memories. You can share them with us through our WAND News Center 17 Facebook page. In just a few minutes, we're having an online town hall meeting about the opioid crisis in Illinois on our WAND Facebook page. You can be part of that by sending us your questions about the issues we've discussed tonight. Meanwhile, from all of us here at WAND News, good night.